how is it that we keep this thing illegal from adults to consume, and yet there's children and the elderly who, without this, wouldn't be able to function.
And I'm hopeful that, we can develop really good, useful therapeutics using this allosteric approach that avoid, some of those negative side effects that we associate with cannabis.
Well, overall, cannabis is the safest known substance known to man.
It's Reefer Madness, the podcast, with Trevor and Kirk.
Kirk, we're back.
Hey, Trevor, how's it going?
Good. As nobody else in the recording world knows, we're starting a little late because I'm running a little late this morning.
It's 8 o'clock in the stinking morning, buddy. It's not late by any means.
Well, no, but I said, sure, let's be here at 8,
yeah.
And then I had to message you, I'm not going to make 8, let's go 8:15, and because I don't have kids at the house anymore, I'm going to blame the dog. She had to go out for the 4:30 pee, so that's fine. We went out, but she got distracted by what I can only describe as young men yelling a little bit, and then a honking of a car, and some slamming of some car doors. Got her very excited and barking to bring her inside. She would not calm down after any of that barking. So, basically I've been more or less up since 4:30, which you'd think would make me on time for things, but I think sometime during my morning coffee I must have zoned out there as I lost a little bit of time.
Well, and you live in a very quiet neighborhood, so...
I do. So, and without making everything hockey related, I think everything might have been hockey related.
Okay.
Our local team, the Dauphin Kings, looks like they lost the Turnbull Cup last night. There was sort of the last round of this part of the playoffs, and I think all those young men, one of our neighbors billets a king, and when I finally did go for a walk with Rolly this morning, there was lots of cars in that area, so I'm thinking they were having a post-game consolation event last night, so that might have been what set Rosie off this morning.
Well, you think they lost? Why would you think they lost?
Because if I Googled it right, that's what Google told me.
Oh, okay.
I'll firmly admit I did not watch the Dauphin Kings last night. Sorry, Kings. I think you might have been watching the Oilers, though, getting in the next round of the playoffs.
Well, that would be Michelle. She's in Alberta right now. She's definitely watching the Oilers.
So a little weird time capsule for those of you listening in the future. Yes, we're mid
Hockey.
NHL playoffs. We are mid MJHL playoffs. The Oilers have made the next round. The Jets, hopefully tonight, make the next round. Anyway, hockey all the time. And we're supposed to hit like 26, 27 degrees this weekend. All very, very weird for the beginning of May in Dauphin.
Yeah. May 2nd, 2025. In the center of the continent, we're giving a weather report, and it's all about hockey, and maybe we'll have plus weather today. Canada, welcome to Canada.
All right, so now that we've got the dog weather and hockey report in, Kirk, you have a very interesting person, Amanda, to talk to, and just tell us a little bit about her. And you were saying you, in your various roles over the years, you've dealt with various people from various government departments, and Amanda's pretty high up there.
Yeah. I've been trying to get a story from the Manitoba. Well, okay. As listeners listen, I get the name of the agency wrong in the middle of it, and she was kind enough to just smile at me, and the conversation carried on. So we are speaking to Amanda Creasy. And she is the Director of Strategic Services and Public Affairs at the Liquor, Gaming, and Cannabis Authority of Manitoba. And what I was saying to you is that, I've in past jobs, past roles, I've worked with government and government bureaucrats, and to have a director speak to us, she runs an entire department. She is the lead of that department, and we got to speak to her, and she was very gracious. And listeners felt that Trevor that somehow I was going to be a tack dog, or I was going to be a Pierre Poilievre or something, and I was going to.
I did think that you might, because you're very passionate, have some strong opinions. I kind of thought there might have been a tirade or two, and you were very good And she honestly was very good and gave me answers I hadn't thought of.
Well, I was going to save the tirade for you, actually, but no,
Okay,
no,
okay.
but no. When I sometimes when I get frustrated with government because government is responsible to the people that elect them. And when you think about cannabis, and this is what Amanda pretty much says in this interview, is that government listens to people. Now, what people have to understand in Manitoba. Our province is in the center of Canada, pretty much the center of the North American continent. It's a small populated region that's larger than most states, probably larger than Texas. I'm not sure. Is anything larger than Texas? I'm not sure. Anyways.
No.
But we're a very large jurisdiction. And when cannabis came legal in 2018, we had a conservative government. And they set it up very conservatively, and like they set up private retail stores, which we talked briefly about. But they also were very, very conservative in their implementation, right? And we talk about this. There's a bunch of things that makes Manitoba unique. First of all, we weren't allowed our grow, and the reasons the conservative government gave me reason to rant. I mean, come on. The reasons they said that we couldn't have grow at home was that they were going to talk about houses molding and children dying, right? A year and a half ago, our government changed. The NDP came in. Meanwhile, there's a big, huge movement, lawsuits about, why can't we follow the federal legislation and allow us to grow? So
Toba Grown, Jesse Lavoie, previous guest.
Yeah, and a previous episode. Just Google it on our webpage, reefermed.ca. So I've been waiting to try to talk to the new government for a long time. And, when you live in a democracy, you get the government you deserve. And Wob has done a wonderful job. Wob Canoe, I've met the man. I've had conversations. I've had opportunity to rant with him about issues. Healthcare is primarily one of them.
Wob Canoe, the current premier of Manitoba.
Correct. I figured everyone knows that. He's probably going to be a federal soon. I think the federal NDP will probably be plucking him out of the fold soon. But however, so getting to talk to the government was special to me, and I wanted to hear their words. Now, Amanda's was very good, and she just reinforced how government works. And you're right. In my past lives, I have worked with governments. I've worked with directors at the director level. In some cases. So I understand the role of the director in the department. So I was quite impressed that she would speak to us, which was nice of her. But what she basically stresses, is that cannabis is still relatively new. You always hear Trevor and I rant about alcohol and how alcohol is accepted in our society when it costs us so dearly. Alcohol destroys communities. I've seen it in healthcare. And as much as I consume alcohol, I like alcohol, I make alcohol, I drink it responsibly. Society has a debt to pay with alcohol. Cannabis is a different substance, but yet government all around the world always compares alcohol, tobacco smoking, gambling, all these substances that we misuse to cannabis, when I seem to view cannabis differently. Cannabis does not cost society money. It actually gives back to society. So yes, you're right. I was anticipating this discussion because I had some questions I wanted to ask. And she kind of answered everything when she said, cannabis is just so new. We're still going into it. And it's easier to have stiffer regulations and make them soften them than to go the other way around. So, yeah, so we have that's the rationale. So they repealed the no grow in home, and they allow us to grow at home. But there's other nuances, and we get into the nuances. And so should we get into the conversation and people will hear that?
Yes, let's listen to Amanda. She's very well spoken, and like I said off air, she said some things that surprised me. So let's hear from Amanda.
All right.
So I'm Amanda Creasy, and I'm the Director of Strategic Services and Public Affairs at the Liquor, Gaming and Cannabis Authority of Manitoba.
Great, fantastic. And I've been trying to get an interview with you guys for quite a while. And really it's all about Manitoba. On May 1st, we are going to be allowed to grow our 4 plants. Maybe I guess I'll let you explain what is this 4 plants we're going to be allowed to grow.
So this is the 4 plants that are allowed for recreational cannabis. So this is separate from the medical stream. And this is the 4 plants that became allowed in October 2018 when the federal government passed the Cannabis Act. So until recently, Manitoba and Quebec have been the only provinces that didn't have home grow. And then obviously in Manitoba, that's going to change on May 1st. Home grow will be coming here.
Yeah, and yes, the conservative government was in play when 2018 was here, and of course, you probably are well known of the whole Toba grown issue, and I think
Yeah,
Wob.
the court case and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think Wob signed the flag and stuff. So Wob Canoe, our premier, promised that this would happen. So congratulations, it happened. So obviously there are some interesting things about this law. Do you want to just sort of highlight the key points of it?
Yeah, so the law is the actual bill and the regulations that are coming in are fairly simplistic in that they repeal the prohibitions that were in the Liquor, Gaming, and Cannabis Control Act for home grow. So they now allow anybody 19 and older and their residents to have the 4 plants that are allowed under the federal legislation. There's rules about, making sure that those plants and the growing is done as safely as possible to keep it out of the hands of young people. And then there are some provisions that have changed for the retailers so that all the licensed retailers who are currently selling cannabis products can now sell plant products, whether that be seeds or clones or live plants. But I suspect it'll be more seed product, but they'll be able to now sell to anybody. So the growing won't be just restricted to medical patients as it is right now. Yeah.
Okay, so something that's unique with Manitoba is that we're allowed to grow our 4 indoors and not outdoors. Is there a rationale for that?
Yeah, so we know that a lot of the other provinces do allow for outdoor growing. Some of the hesitation in fully opening the regulations to allow outdoor grow is the government is, taking a cautious approach with cannabis policy. We have a newer government who's getting up to speed on this file. They have a lot of concerns across different industries about safety, especially about like young kids, things like that. And so they've decided to have growing for indoor only. We realize that folks do want the ability to grow outdoors, but for right now, they're taking a measured approach, allowing the home grow, allowing it to be indoors, secure area. But it's one of those things that I think we'll continue to monitor once this goes legal on May 1st to see, how things go, what the compliance rates look like, as well as, the demand for outdoor grow. So that's something we will be monitoring, but at this time, they're going to stay in the indoor space, and we'll keep an eye on whether there's expansion in the future.
Fair enough, fair enough. I got to ask the question, what's the measure they're afraid of? What are they worried about? What's the difference indoor, outdoor?
It's a challenging one to answer because I know, you can make the argument that, with the other provinces, it still has to be secure outdoor. But I think with cannabis, cannabis is somewhat at a disadvantage because of it's only been legal for a short period of time. And so there's still a lot of, as you mentioned, stigma, there's hesitation, there's unknowns. We're waiting for research and data and evidence to grow alongside the maturing of the industry. And so I think for regulatory purposes, it's much harder to, make things stricter later if there's an issue, as opposed to taking a more measured approach in opening up the industry. And so I think some of it might be a hesitation because of the unknown, and that's, I think that's just some of the things we deal with as a regulator because we're only just over the 6-year mark with cannabis, whereas alcohol, we've got decades of it being societally acceptable and legal and people being used to it. And so I think it's one of those things of over time, as people get more used to recreational cannabis, you will probably see things starting to relax.
Well, that was a very measured answer, and I appreciate that. And it was a good answer, because my next question is, obviously, alcohol's been around a long time, and we know the damage alcohol does. Now, the Conservative government, when they came in 2018, made cannabis 19 years old and kept alcohol at 18, because we're an 18 province. So is there a reason why the NDP government didn't choose to just harmonize the age?
Yeah, I can't necessarily speak on behalf of the political side of government and all the choices they made, but with the Conservative government we had previously, there was a lot of questions around, what was the right age, what are the impacts of cannabis use on people with developing brains, and from a regulatory perspective, we looked at it, okay, well, alcohol is 18. It shares a lot of risks, similar and things like that. But you also get folks who work on the public health side who have concerns about, brain development and things like that, and suggest that, it wasn't safe until 25. And it's like, well, where do you have some middle ground between those different stakeholders and those different viewpoints? And again, like I mentioned before, I think some of it's the fear of the unknown, and the fear of, if you let this go too loose, are you putting folks at risk unintentionally? And so for right now, I think what government is doing right now is they're focusing on some of the key issues that have been brought up by, the public and different stakeholders in the industry. I can't say that they would never harmonize the age. It's just one of those things of, with them only being about a year and a half into their term, they focused on the home grow. They have some other legislation up right now about alcohol and cannabis that they're trying to make some changes there. And I think it's just because that's all embedded in legislation, it can be really challenging to get those changes through. And so it's, there's only so much room on a legislative calendar for different issues. But it's one of those things I can't say for sure if they're planning to. But again, we are an odd case having 18 for the one and 19 for the other. The other provinces have harmonized. But I wouldn't say that it's not in the cards, but we haven't heard that that's a priority right now. So we don't have any things in the works right now for the age.
Yeah, that's a fair comment. The other question I have is liquor, gaming, cannabis, alcohol, of course. You guys are involved with socials and making the regulations for people doing socials, right? So I have a real concern that with the stigma and how government has unrolled it, people are left with vagueness. And there's a vagueness that happens right now in Manitoba, because if you read the law carefully, the only place the government allows you to consume cannabis is in your domicile. Like, if you read it carefully, there's nowhere else you can consume cannabis.
There is a prohibition right now on public consumption. There's only an exception for topical products can be used in public spaces, which I realize is very limited. But yeah, Manitobans are a bit restricted that they can only consume basically in their residence. And then if your residence happens to be, a rental property or a condominium, there can be further rules, because cannabis also falls under the rules under the Smoking and Vaping Product Protection Act. So, those general smoking prohibitions and things like that. So yeah, it can be difficult, I imagine, for folks in rentals and things like that to find a space where they can consume legally.
So in your job as the government spokesperson, how would you help someone? How would you help someone that is not allowed to consume cannabis in their home? Where would you suggest?
I mean, one of my questions to somebody would be like, well, how are you taking your cannabis? Because now that edibles have been legalized, there's a lot more product options for people, and you're probably likely able to consume products that aren't vaping and smoking based. So, there is that option for people that, if you're in the comfort of your home, having an edible, there's no smell from that. There's no, residual effects to the people around you for that. That might be an option. We have had some inquiries about, I know, some states have had like consumption spaces, like public spaces, similar to like where you'd have a drinking establishment for alcohol, but somewhere where people could consume liquor. We've actually run public consultation on that twice since legalization, and there just hasn't really been a huge demand or uptake for it. It's not something that we necessarily would never see in the future, but I think with the impacts of the pandemic and the challenges faced by the hospitality industry that they're still feeling as a result of that, I think cannabis is a challenging substance in that type of situation because the markups aren't the same as with alcohol, and people don't consume it in the same way. And because it can't cohabitate with alcohol, it's I can't speak on behalf of entrepreneurs, but I would suspect that, if you're looking at the dollars and cents, you're probably getting more value per square foot on alcohol sales than you would on cannabis. And so for folks, yeah, it's, if you're in a property where you don't get to make the decisions about smoking, right now we'd suggest people to try the wide range of products that we see growing and growing every day. I think the other day I saw macaroni and cheese was at one of the
Yeah.
retailers. It's like, there's a lot more options in how you can take your cannabis. So I think that has helped because that first year, 2018 and 19, that would have been tough because we only had the dry bud. And so that would have been difficult for folks. You would have the space.
Yeah. Yeah. And to be honest, I haven't really heard that law enforcement, I mean, if you're consuming cannabis responsibly, I haven't heard law enforcement really going out of the way to bother people. But it is interesting that government regulations have put people in a situation that people that enjoy flower, that they're actually put into a situation where they got to break a law to enjoy something that's federally legal. So there's a paradox, and I'm hoping the government recognizes that.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things, working on the regulatory side, I think it's a lot of things that we were like, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, like we've seen the pattern. Like I can go back in our records and see the changes that have happened for alcohol over the last, 80, 90 years.
Yeah.
And I truly believe that probably is going to happen for cannabis, but it will take time and people getting more used to it, more comfortable, the government's getting more comfortable, the evidence to show that it's not the end of the world that some people thought it was going to be in 2018. And so how quickly those changes happen, I can't say, but I do foresee that over time we will see some relaxing of the rules.
Okay, and that leads me into the next question: socials. I mean, Manitoba's known across the country, right? I mean, I come from British Columbia, and I knew about Manitoba's socials in the 70s, and I moved to Alberta, and people talked about Manitoba's, socials in the 90s. So we have socials here, and I'm involved with volunteer organizations. We put on socials. So at an alcohol acceptable social, you step outside and people are freely consuming a product, cannabis, in illegal spaces. So are we ever going to see permits where we can have an outdoor consumption spot for cannabis at socials?
Not right now, not while the public prohibition is in the law, so that would have to get repealed. I believe Alberta has had a couple. I think there's been a few at festivals and things like that. But right now in Manitoba, it's again, it's one of those things of immediately no, because you need the consumption prohibition to be relaxed in order to have that. Similar to like, you can't just drink on the street legally. You have to be in a space that's got the permit for it. But yeah, we'd need legislative change to have that prohibition either repealed or have it modified so that similar to liquor, that public consumption can happen, but only in these specific circumstances, like a licensed establishment or a permitted function, things like that. So I don't see it happening in the next few years, but it's one of those things that, yeah, I think as other provinces have, pilot cases and things like that, and we're able to see what were the impacts, what were the challenges. I suspect it's something that we'll be faced with of people wanting to have that option. But it will also be a test for what do the event spaces want to allow as well, right? So I don't know. I have absolutely no idea how banquet halls and things like that would feel about it, but there is also that side of it too. So.
Well, you look at the Winnipeg Folk Festival. I mean,
Oh yeah, the folk festival. The folk festival, absolutely, sure. I think that's
well,
that's probably the perfect test environment. But
well,
but some of them that have alcohol licenses and things like that, I'm sure you can appreciate with the nursing background, like the evidence we do have that, co-consuming has a lot of challenges and risks to people, and so right now we don't let them coexist, and so if push comes to shove and people have to pick, well, I either have cannabis or either have liquor, that might add some challenges to logistics of hosting some of these things. But outdoor festivals, things like that, I could see in the future there might be space for that. Yeah.
that's a good answer. Going back to the four, and you made the comment in the start of the interview about commercial businesses are going to be allowed to get seeds and clones and stuff. Obviously, May 1st is the day. Do you believe possibly that some businesses thought ahead, or do you think it's going to take business time to get these things in play?
It might take a bit of time. Liquor and Lotteries is responsible for securing that product from the licensed producer. So as the wholesaler, they get all the product from across the province. They have sent out communication to all the licensees to let them know that they are bringing in seeds, how they can get them along with their other products. I believe they're focusing just on seeds right now, not live plants. But yeah, they wouldn't have been able to order anything earlier because we're in that, awkward stage of it's not allowed yet, not till May 1st. But MBLL already has those supply chain connections with all those suppliers, so I'm sure it will not take long at all for the seed product to get across the province, just like it's already going to our neighbors in Ontario and Saskatchewan. So I'm sure they won't have to wait too long to get.
Elbows up here. Are we able to, like, if I could get seeds from Alberta in the mail, is Manitobans allowed to get their seeds from other provinces, or do we have to buy them from Manitoba?
Yeah, you're supposed to buy them from Manitoba. Right now, we still have interprovincial. Like if you happen to be physically in Alberta and you buy, but you're not supposed to be like buying online and having shipped over here. So there is still some interprovincial trade barriers on that. But again, as we see with the economic climate right now, and I know the premiers are in discussions about relaxing some of those things, we might see some of that change.
Fair enough. And I guess one final question is farm gate. When do you ever, right now we have a brand new, it's about a year and a half old. We have a great brewery in town. We promote it as a tourist destination, microbreweries, micro distilleries. We also have a cannabis licensed producer in town. When do you foresee he'll be able to sell his cannabis from his front gate?
I don't know. It's a good question, but I don't know that I have really any idea of when that might happen. Manitoba has, as I'm sure you're aware, a smaller footprint in the production side of things than other provinces. So we don't have as many producers to lobby for that kind of thing. It's really not something that I have enough of a finger on the pulse to know in sort of timelines or even what Travel Manitoba or things like that. Like, do they have any insights on the demand for things like that or how that's looking in other provinces? It's one of those things that you would hope over time that governments would recognize wanting to have more entrepreneurial freedom and flexibility and things like that. But as far as a timeline on something like that, I couldn't even guess.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And Manitoba is actually quite interesting in the sense that, again, a conservative government implemented it, and they made it private entrepreneurs. So we have private stores here, whereas in other provinces they have provincial stores. So that is kind of cool. Do you ever foresee the NDP government doing that, creating, or just keeping it as private?
We've not heard anything from government that they intend to do that. I mean, that would be very difficult at this point, like even though the market is still relatively new in terms of only being just over 6 years old, it is still well established. We have over 200 licensed retailers in Manitoba. And I think to flip that side or to either flip it to public or to make it some sort of hybrid where the government was now competing with the retailers, I think that would be really challenging. And I think that would be really hard for the retailers. We have a lot of like independent retailers who are not part of big chains, who are serving a lot of the smaller rural communities, and I don't suspect that that's something they would want to do. I mean, the province is still involved in the wholesaling and the procurement of product from the licensee, so there is still that involvement there. But I think that the model is established and is sort of ingrained. Now, if the roles had been flipped and we had had an NDP government then, it might have looked different. But I think now its roots are in. I think this is what we're going to see for the foreseeable future. There obviously will always be government involvement, like us being regulatory and things like that. But I think you'll probably still see a private cannabis market for the foreseeable future.
Fantastic. Is there any question I didn't ask that you're expecting me to ask?
Oh, that's a good question. No, I think you asked a lot of good questions, and I appreciate the opportunity to chat about cannabis. We do a lot of work as a neutral, nonpartisan regulator. We're not for or against any of our industries. And so, we do recognize that cannabis, a lot of people have a lot of learning to do and understanding the product and the industry and how it affects people. And, we're really glad that people are getting the message out that this product can be used safely and responsibly. I would direct people if they're interested. We have a lot of public education materials on cannabis and education about how people can engage with these products safely and how to find retailers close to them. So, visit our websites, lgcamb.ca. There's lots of great stuff on there about cannabis. But yeah, no, I think you asked me a good range of questions.
Fantastic. Okay, Trevor. So I'm out walking my dogs, my dog yesterday, and I'm out on Sello grounds. I got a dog story. I'm out at Sello grounds, and I'm also keeping a friend's dog. So I've got Coco and I've got my dog River, and we're walking Sello grounds. Now Sello grounds is where we have festivals in Dauphin. It's I don't know, probably 10, 15, no, maybe longer, maybe I don't know, 10 acres of land, maybe bigger than that. It's big piece of parcel. We have the Country Fest there. We have Ukrainian Fest there, and I'm walking my dogs. I'm going through the Northgate trails, the bike trails, and the dogs are gone. They're gone. They have I walk my dogs off leash. They're big dogs, and they are after a deer. So I walk the trail looking for the dogs. I go up on top of the cliff. I'm looking down into the valley looking for the dogs. There's no dogs. And I can lose my dog, but losing a friend's dog is a whole different thing.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Right? So I'm walking going, what the hell, right? The dogs are gone. So what do? So I walk back to my van hoot. I lay on the bed and I have a little nap thinking the dogs will come back. And this is when you sent me the post saying, hey, really liked the interview, looking forward to doing the wrap. When do you want to do it? And I'm thinking, I just lost somebody's dog, man. I don't want to talk about the podcast. Anyways, so you sent the message to me, and as I was snoozing, the dogs raced into the van, licked my face, soaking wet, frothing. they had a lot of fun, but they were gone for a good hour chasing deer. Now, anyways, I should let you talk about Amanda. What did you think of the interview?
No. That is, I'm really, really glad how that story ended. I think everybody is.
Oh, yeah.
But,
Coco came back, River came back.
So, the cannabis lounges. She talked about many things, and you mentioned up front, and it's worth stressing because I agree too. That's kind of the thesis of everything she said is when you're government and you're not sure and things are new, start strict and reduce your restrictions later because it's so much easier than starting with no restrictions and trying to add them in. So I think that was a great sort of thesis for almost everything cannabis related she talked about. Cannabis lounges. I didn't think, and again, she's not an expert, we're not an expert, but we have mused about why we don't have cannabis lounges, and she mentioned, and I hadn't thought about this, is they might, in the current, we'll call it tax structure, they're not going to be that profitable. When you are a bar, for lack of a better word, a alcohol serving establishment, you buy stuff from the Manitoba Liquor and Lotteries, you put a profit margin on it, then you serve it, and that's where you make your money. And yes, I'll blame the government here a little, because taxes are so high on cannabis right now, it would be really hard to convince someone to come into a lounge, buy cannabis stuff from you, consume it there for way more than the already relatively high prices they could consume it at home. So, that would be hard for an entrepreneur to make money. And if an entrepreneur said, okay, bring your own and consume it here, again, what do you charge? A membership fee? Here's a $10 scone, here's a $20 cup of coffee. I hadn't really thought about the fact, and there's got to be an entrepreneur smarter than me, but as compared to opening a bar where it's relatively straightforward how you would make money, yeah, it's going to be a little less straightforward, besides all the regulation stuff, about how you would open a cannabis smoking lounge and make it profitable.
Yeah, interesting. That's your first point, as a pharmacist and fee-for-service healthcare provider. A little jab.
Absolutely.
However, I'm a fee-for-service healthcare provider too. But however, the language that I really wrong word, that perked my ears is that she used language that I am actually going to use. I think she's influenced me here when she used the word public consumption prohibition. And she used the word prohibition several times. I actually wrote it down on a piece of paper, prohibition. And I never thought of it that way. And in the many years that I've been doing this, I've never used the word prohibition when I'm doing my rants. But essentially, although we have cannabis is legal, in Manitoba, there's no public consumption. You're not allowed to consume flower in public, which is to me a bug in my bonnet, which is one of the rants that I think you're probably afraid that I was going to jump on her about.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe a little bit. Because think about it. You live in a condominium that they have a strata law that says you can't consume cigarettes, and tobacco and marijuana are seen as combustibles. Even though they're completely different substances, different matter. So where does someone who lives or rents allowed to consume? You can't go in the parking lot. I guess the parking lot might be a private facility, but unless it says that you're allowed to consume there, where does someone consume? So I'm gonna sort of take your thought about an entrepreneur opening up a lounge and saying maybe there should be places that are designated as smoking places. I mean, people do smoke cigarettes. As much as a healthcare professional, I don't like that. However, everyone has the right to do their own gig. So we're allowed to smoke a cigarette outside. You can go to an airport in Vancouver and consume tobacco in the smoking area and cannabis in the smoking area. Why couldn't they have done that with cannabis in Manitoba? Why couldn't they have opened it up? That disappoints me. And when she used the word prohibition...
Well, I'm going to jump in on that because I think that's where she was talking about. I don't think right now there has, yes, terrible capitalist. I don't think there is the demand from people, entities wanting to open up a smoking lounge to go to the government and say, we would really like to open up a cannabis lounge here because...
I'm not talking about a lounge. I'm talking about outdoor
a
space.
place.
Outdoor.
Oh yeah, but it rolls in. If you were to,
don't you think
space. But
don't you think that's a government excuse? Just because people are not asking for it doesn't necessarily mean we don't need it. For example, nobody's asking for speed limits on highways.
Well, I think they would argue, and again, remember I'm pro-cannabis. I'm just doing a little devil's advocate here. I think the government would say nobody needs to smoke cannabis. Now, there's medical exemptions, etc. But if we're strictly on the rec end, like nobody needs to drink a beer, nobody needs to have a cigarette, and nobody needs to smoke cannabis. And I guess again, I think we should be able to get some nuances and get people to, it's a legal substance, they should be able to consume it if they wish. But, the argument, if I was in a rental unit or a condo, is, I might not want to smell my neighbor consuming cannabis. You could argue that they're not going to, yada yada, but that's always going to come up. Is if they are smoking cannabis below me and all of our ducts are connected and I can smell that and I don't like that, then your freedom ends at the end of my nose.
Completely agree with you. I was raised in a family where both my parents smoked cigarettes, and I can remember coming into my house and there was literally a fog of smoke. I can literally remember our walls were orange from tobacco smoke. Completely get it. Understand it. However, government has allowed a substance legally, but yet government's also said, oh, well, yeah, you can't really smoke it anywhere. That's unfair. And just because the public isn't sophisticated enough that they're asking, and I shouldn't say sophisticated, again, it goes back to people understanding cannabis. More people don't smoke cannabis than do smoke cannabis. But still, I think government should sometimes be responsible for giving things to us that we don't ask for, right? And
that's extraordinarily rare.
Well, of course not, because it's expensive. It's probably expensive, and it's government. We get the government we deserve, and people, if it's not on the radar, people aren't going to ask for it. But there are people affected. I mean, we got people that live on streets that don't have lunches. We create food places for them. We create help for them. We got people that like to consume flour. Where do they consume it? If you rent. And think about how many young people cannot afford a home. Like the whole idea of not being able to form a home. So you've got a whole generation of kids that can't buy a home for economic reasons. And maybe they want to have a little cannabis by the fire in their backyard, but their renter says no. I mean, there should be space. There should be a space someplace someone can consume. Now, having ranted on that, I do love the fact that she's promoting safer use of cannabis by suggesting, well, you can eat it, which is safer in a sense because there's no hydrocarbons. However,
and not to belabor this, but governments are almost never in front of anything. Governments, just kind of how they work, are almost always reactionary. Governments don't, think ahead and say, hey, this would be great 10 years from now and plan it now. That's not how governments work. Governments kind of, how they're, in fact, one of the only sort of forward thinking, and I think it might have been a mistake, is when the Trudeau government promised to legalize cannabis, because if you remember back in whatever it was, 2015, they were so far behind in the polls that no one thought they were going to get a seat. And at that point, I think governments throw out, we're going to change how voting works, and hey, we'll legalize cannabis just to get a little bit of airtime. I'm still under the impression that that's sort of how Canada ended up with cannabis legalization. Is government Trudeau at that point was so far behind in the polls, they weren't going to get a seat. Why don't we throw out something so we get some kind of airtime somewhere?
Well, but this is why old men are grumpy, right? There's a reason why old men get grumpy. But you know what? Hey, here's a proactive government thing. was it Duff Roblin built the Roblin's Ditch?
Duff's Ditch.
Duff's Ditch? That was proactive government work?
It was, but that's very rare. And for those of you not in Manitoba, part of the province around Winnipeg, our capital and biggest city, floods not necessarily every spring, but many springs. And many years ago, after a huge flood, Premier at the time, Duff Roblin, had them construct a floodway around the city, which has protected the city for many floods, but it cost an incredible amount of money, and everybody thought it was ridiculous, and it took many years to build, and how on earth could he waste so much money? And of course it turned out to be a wonderful thing, but that's not usually what governments do.
Yeah, it's unfortunate we don't have forward-thinking people, but I still believe, this was a good interview.
It was,
and I enjoyed the conversation. She was pleasant. She helped, and she also recognized that sometimes government just has to do things slowly. I get it, but there's still things that government writes laws sometimes because they're prejudicial and it's built on stigma. And just because, this has been my rant forever, right? That provinces treat cannabis as a substance of misuse, right? The provinces do not treat cannabis as medicine, and this is what's got to change. This is one of the reasons why we have this podcast, and this was a discussion, I guess we should have said this up front, this was a discussion on recreational cannabis, and Amanda did discuss this because medical cannabis, licensed medical cannabis consumers of cannabis do not follow the same regulations as recreational cannabis. Somebody with a medical license can consume their cannabis in a public place responsibly. Just don't be stupid about it. But recreational guys can't. So, however, we talked about Birds Hill, the Winnipeg Folk Festival, one of the largest folk festivals in Canada. It's famous for those that do folk festivals. I've been to several. I started in 1980. I went to one in 1980. Saw Stan Rogers, saw Mike Post, saw a lot of Towns Van Zandt, saw some Tony Bird, saw some amazing acts back in 1980. But there was cannabis everywhere and no alcohol. There were no beer gardens at folk festivals when I first started going to them. People brought plastic jugs of wine and sat on blankets and smoked reefer and drank wine out of a plastic bucket. But then they started putting in alcohol beer gardens into them. And then they started not allowing smoking on the site. And now what's happened, and I find it hilarious because I've ranted about this before, one of the most socialist things ever, going to an outdoor music festival, has some of the strictest rules.
Well, no, and that's a great point, and that brought up two sorts of, I thought they were really interesting. One is, because you guys spend a lot of time talking about folk festival, like the Winnipeg Folk Festival, I think is well over 50 years old. Like you said, probably world famous at this point, but outdoor festival. But if you were as far as I know, a quote unquote cannabis license doesn't exist yet. But if it did, right now, the way the rules, regulations are structured, you couldn't both have a cannabis and an alcohol license at the same time. Yeah. And you'd have to choose and go, oh, well then, yeah, if you were running an outdoor festival, you pick the one that makes money, which is the alcohol. Yeah. So, maybe that might be a next sort of massaging of the rules is, could outdoor festivals get a combined alcohol and cannabis license? Maybe even just give one. Maybe just the Winnipeg Folk Festival. See how it goes as a pilot project. Yeah. And when nothing terrible happens, maybe that's a place to start. Because like you said, especially folk festivals have used, cannabis has been used at them historically for a long time. The other, I didn't realize that Manitoba was way out there as an outlier, that our cannabis use age and our alcohol use age were different. Like, I knew that happened, but I didn't know we were the only ones that weren't harmonized. And yeah, that is a little weird. It's
a little weird. They had an opportunity, I thought, to change things. But you made an interesting point about public consumption, and she stressed this. And again, it was one of those little trigger points that I went, aha, because I'm very involved with the Watson Arts Center. As you know, I volunteer a lot there. My wife's part of the executive team. We spend a lot of time at the Watson Arts Center. live music is always better at the Watson. But oftentimes we've said, there should be a spot because everyone goes outside. They got their vape pens and they're smoking their vape pens outside the building. Nobody's going to deal with it. Nobody's going to say anything about it. But my thought was, well, we should have an outdoor lounge where people can go smoke their cigarettes and consume their cannabis legally. That ain't going to happen until, and here comes my trigger point, until the prohibition of public consumption is appealed. And I was thinking, of course, so we can't get special consideration. We can't do anything special. Winnipeg Folk Festival is not going to be able to ask for public consumption of cannabis until the law changes. So there's no ability for her department to say, okay, we'll issue you this one time to test the waters. They can't do it until they change the law. That was another little bit of aha moment for me. Of course. So interesting.
It really was. And Amanda, thank you very much for coming on. You were articulate and explained stuff, and again, gave us way more to think about. Kirk and I have been talking about this for a while. We kind of thought we, not lawyers, but, we've talked about it enough that we kind of thought we knew what was going on, and you told us a bunch of things that we hadn't thought of. So that was really good.
Yeah, it was good. It was a good one. Another good one.
Another good one.
I'm Kirk Nyquist. I'm the registered nurse. We're found at Reefer Medness, the podcast at reefermed.ca. Our webpage is updated, new blog pieces. Lots of fun on the webpage.
And I'm Trevor Schufelt. I'm the pharmacist. And I really did message Kirk saying I really enjoyed this interview, because I really did enjoy this interview. I really hope you guys did too.
It was hard for me to enjoy it as I was lamenting how I was going to tell my friend I've lost her dog.
It all turned out. The interview turned out well. The dog story turned out well. Everyone, take a deep breath. It's all good.
All right.
Have a good day, everybody. See you later.
Check out the complete library of Reefer Medness episodes at reefermed.ca. And make sure to follow us on all the socials for bonus info on what Trevor and Kirk are up to.
Oh, is it in your recording?
Let me just.
Do you see a little box for it?
There was a box on the side. I don't think it's gone away. It's still bleeping.
Yeah.
Sorry, Renee.
No, but that's interesting.
I think it's still doing.
Because I've seen those.
I think
before.
it's still doing something.
Yeah, it's copying us. So hopefully, if you.
Okay. All right. Let's actually start.
Okay, we're starting now.